Good morning to Europe, good afternoon to Asia, and good evening to those all across the fruited plains. You are now locked into the worldwide 20-megabit beacon of truth, hope, and justice, otherwise known as your nightly dose of the Crimson Pill. Ladies and gentlemen of the Republic Broadcasting Network listening audience, I am Antonin Fiore, your host of the Crimson Pill radio program, and I welcome you to yet another edition in which we're going to cover some very, very troubling news by way of addressing headlines first and then trying to touch upon and see how that fits in, that information fits into the bigger picture about what's happening in the world. If you were with us last night, you heard me making a further exposition of some of the news and releases, the disclosures being made by NASA, which is really to say being made by our secret space program by way of the whitewashed picket fence outward persona that they call NASA that gives us our crumbs from the table. And tonight, folks, we're going to take a twist in a little different direction, but as the show wears on, we're going to tie that back into the bigger picture. Once again, as I approach each night's program, it's difficult for me to keep in mind the fact that we have the veteran listeners of a network like RBN. We have veteran listeners of my Crimson Pill radio program based on and coming from my former networks and folks that have tuned in to the YouTube channel Crimson Pill TV and listen to the entire archive. But folks, I have to balance that with all of the new listeners, and I continue to get messages each day from folks who mention, I just heard your program for the first time yesterday or today, and I want to let you know how much I appreciate it. And then those folks begin to ask, can you fill me in on some of what I've missed? Well, I have to point you folks in the direction of the YouTube channel Crimson Pill TV. Our website is experiencing an overhaul right now. Soon it will be up and running live with a full set of archives as well. But folks, it's very difficult to try to paint the picture of the entire, well, let's face it, the horror of what is being done to us by the elites, the New World Order. Some might even use the term Illuminati. Whichever phrase you choose to pick, folks, it is the story of history itself that power begets power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And at every phase in human history, when people have attained a certain level of wealth and power, all that they seem to choose to do with that is to further consolidate it in the forms of tyranny. And only, folks, only for a few brief moments in the course of our human history has there been an experience of freedoms and or liberty. They're blips on the radar in the course of human history. And when we come back after the commercial break, I'm going to tell you about today's latest disclosure of horrific, unspeakably unbelievable activity being conducted by our own United States government using your taxpayer dollars. Please join me on the other side of the break as we begin the analysis. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Crimson Pill radio program here on Republic Broadcasting Network. Folks, there is so much information to cover and always so little time. I can't wait until our program does expand out into the new 2-hour format. It's great to be here each weeknight now, Monday through Friday. That gives us a bit more time. But to begin tonight's exposition, and again, I'd like to start with a headline, a piece of news that you probably have not heard about, or maybe you only heard about it peripherally some brief period of time back, but now today they finally made a broader disclosure about this information. Many of you will find this shocking, many of you will find it unbelievable, but believe me, it is absolutely true, and it absolutely ties into the bigger picture about what is happening, the control agenda of the world's elites that they are utilizing on segments of the world's populations today, including the American population, but that they have plans to expand out to a broader agenda and a more stark and horrific agenda. We'll try to get to that big picture here later in the show after we talk about this headline from the Associated Press released today. The headline, Panel Reveals New Details of 1940s Experiment. Now, talk about a whitewashed headline, especially as I get into the article. I'll begin to quote now. A presidential panel on Monday disclosed shocking new details of U.S. medical experiments done in Guatemala in the 1940s, including a decision to reinfect a dying woman in a syphilis study. Now get this. The Guatemala experiments are already considered one of the darker episodes of medical research in U.S. history. But panel members say the new information indicates that the researchers were unusually unethical, even when placed into historical context of a different era. Well, that's what these panel members think, is that it was unusually unethical, but apparently these panel members grew up sheltered and naive because they don't realize this. Although it is horrific, don't get me wrong, folks, it's only one drop in the bucket of the horrific agenda sponsored by your taxpayer dollars vis-a-vis the U.S. Public Health Service. Wait till we get into more of the details. Let me continue reading now. Quote, the researchers put their own medical advancement first and human decency a far second, unquote, said Anita Allen, a member of the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. We're going to come back to Ms. Allen's quote here in just a moment after I read a bit more. From 1946 to 1948, the U.S. Public Health Service and the Pan American Sanitary Bureau worked with several Guatemalan government agencies to do medical research, paid for by the U.S. government, which is to say paid for by you, Americans, that involved deliberately exposing people to sexually transmitted diseases. The researchers apparently were trying to see if penicillin, then relatively new, could prevent infections to the one person, the 13 people, the 130 people? No, folks, 1,300 people, 1,300 people involved in this study that were exposed to syphilis, gonorrhea, or cancroid. Those infected included soldiers, prostitutes, prisoners, and mental patients with syphilis. The commission revealed Monday that only about 700 of those infected received some sort of treatment. So that's about half. Sounds about right, doesn't it? They chose a control sample and the test sample. So about half of the group received, quote, some sort of treatment, which when we refer over to the Tuskegee experiments that were conducted right here on good old U.S. of A. soil in Alabama from 1932 to 1972, you'll find out what the some sort of treatment refers to or is defined by. Now continuing with the article. Also, 83 people died, although it's not clear if the deaths were directly due to the experiments. Oh, my goodness gracious, it's not clear. How about that? The journalist responsible for writing this piece, I'm not going to share that individual's name. Again, it is Associated Press. You can do a Yahoo or Google search, probably quickly find this article for yourself. How naive journalists these days. They are nothing little more than court reporters writing exactly what they're told, performing no critical analysis of their own or investigative journalism for that matter. That's shameful. It's disgusting, although it's not clear if the deaths were directly due to the experiments. Well, what is clear is that the experiments and the experiments done on these people was directly due to the U.S. Public Health Service. And who do you suppose this journalist has been getting his information that has been filtered and sanitized from? Continuing on. The research came up with no useful medical information, according to some experts. Well, how about that? It was hidden for decades, but came to light last year after a Wellesley College medical historian discovered records among the papers of Dr. John Cutler. Folks, that's a name to remember. Those of you scoring at home, make a note of that so you can perform further research. Dr. John Cutler, because this was not his first foray out into left field of performing heinous acts on his fellow man. President Barack Obama called Guatemala's president, Alvaro Colom, to apologize. How about that? Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate your apology on that. He also ordered his Bioethics Commission to review the Guatemala experiments. That work is nearly done. Skipping forward now into the article to get into a bit more of the meat and bones. Wait till you hear this, folks. It's absolutely sickening and disgusting. In fact, I would probably be throwing up a little bit in my mouth right now if it weren't for the fact that this is just one more in a long chain of such experiments that your taxpayer dollars have funded, that your elected leaders have allowed to happen, that your intelligence community that your taxpayer dollars fund have worked behind the scenes to foster this research and make it happen. It's one in another long line, but here's some of these details. Continuing with the article, they revealed that some of the experiments were more shocking than was previously known. For example, 7 women with epilepsy who were housed at Guatemala's home for the insane were injected with syphilis below the back of the skull, a risky procedure. The researchers thought the new infection might somehow help cure epilepsy. Oh, my God. There you go again, journalist. Way to do your investigative research here instead of just typing exactly what you're being told by some stooge in D.C. The women each got bacterial meningitis, probably as a result of the unsterile injections, but were treated. Folks, rather than comment, I'm going to continue. Perhaps the most disturbing details involved a female syphilis patient with an undisclosed terminal illness. The researchers, curious to see the impact of an additional infection, infected her with gonorrhea in her eyes and elsewhere. Let me repeat that. The researchers, curious to see the impact of an additional infection, infected her with gonorrhea in her eyes and elsewhere. 6 months later, she died. Now, folks, I understand that some of you might be having a hard time believing this, but let me remind you, this research conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service, paid for with United States taxpayer dollars, and conducted by American medical professionals. And out of their curiosity to see the impact of an additional infection, infected her with gonorrhea in the eyes and elsewhere. Folks, I can understand if you think this is pretty sick and you're right on target. But once again, please remember, this is just one example in a long line of such examples. And this example happened to be conducted upon people in Guatemala. Yet, as the show continues and as you continue to hear the Crimson Pill radio program, you'll hear about how they have done just as horrific, heinous, and disgusting experimentation on your own fellow citizens. Continuing with the article, Dr. Amy Gutman, head of the commission, described the case as, quote, chillingly egregious, unquote. You suppose so, Dr. Gutman? And yet they didn't teach you that when you went through medical school, did they, Dr. Gutman? No. In fact, they kept this one buried under the rock. They kept it hidden in the darkness until, what was her name again here? The historian from Wellesley College happened to uncover records from the papers of Dr. John Cutler. Aside from that, it had been neatly whitewashed and covered up, ladies and gentlemen, until finally the light of day happened to shine on this. And folks, you have no concept, you have no clue how many other such experiments have been done in exactly the same way. The others that we can point to that we do have a chain of evidence on, horrifically, are just the tip of the iceberg. Continuing now with the article. During that time, other researchers were also using people as human guinea pigs, in some cases infecting them with illnesses. Studies weren't as regulated then, and the planning-on-the-fly feel of Cutler's work was not unique.